I spent my savings building a guest house in my parents' backyard, thinking it would be mine. The day it was finished, my dad handed me my bags. Your sister needs it more than you, he said. I walked away without a word. A week later, they called me in a panic when they realized. I don't even know where to start. I still can't believe it actually happened. For years, I had been trying to make smart decisions to secure my future. I wasn't reckless with money, I wasn't irresponsible. I did everything the way I was supposed to. When I realized that buying a house on my own was out of reach financially, my parents were the ones who suggested building a small guest house on their property. They made it sound perfect. It'll always be yours, my mom had said. This is an investment for your future, sweetheart. I believed them. I used every spare dollar I had. Every bit of my time, every weekend, every day off. I worked with the contractors, made sure everything was done right. I picked out the flooring, the cabinets, the little details that made it feel like mine. For months, I imagined myself in that house. It wasn't just some extra space, it was my home. My safe place. And then, the day it was finally finished, when I was supposed to move in, my dad casually handed me my bags and said the words that still make my stomach turn. Your sister needs it more than you. Just like that. Like I was nothing. I think the worst part was how casual they were about it. There was no apology. No hesitation. They had already made their decision long before they told me. I just stood there staring at him, waiting for him to laugh. To tell me he was joking. He wasn't. I turned to my mom, expecting some kind of guilt, some kind of hesitation on her face. But she just sighed and smiled like this was all completely reasonable. You're young, Emily. You don't have a husband, no kids, you'll figure something out. But your sister? This will help her start her life. I felt my stomach drop. You told me this was my house, I said, my voice shaking. Mom sighed like I was being dramatic. It's still part of the family, sweetie. And family helps family. I looked at my sister standing there, not even pretending to feel bad. I mean, it's not like you need it, Em, she said with a shrug. And it's not like you were paying rent or anything. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how insane it was. I paid for the whole thing. The construction, the materials, the labor, the appliances, everything. Every cent was mine. And now they were acting like I was the selfish one for wanting to live in the house I had built? I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, to demand what was mine. But then I looked at them. And I knew it wouldn't change anything. They had already made up their minds. They had never planned for me to live there. They just wanted me to build it. I don't even remember packing my bags. I just remember walking away, leaving behind the house I built with my own hands. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just left. And I think that confused them more than anything. Maybe they expected me to beg. To try to negotiate. To fight for something that was already mine. But I was too tired. So I walked out. And that's when the real silence started. At first they didn't call. Didn't check in. I think they assumed I'd come crawling back. Maybe they thought I'd change my mind and offer to just share the guest house with my sister. I didn't. Instead, I cut off contact. Not in an official, dramatic way. I just stopped being available. And I waited. Because deep down I knew something they didn't. I knew they had cut corners. I had been so careful choosing contractors, making sure everything was done right. But at the very end of the process, my dad decided to save money by hiring his own guy to finish up some of the final details. Things like the plumbing, the electrical, the last coat of paint. I told him it was a mistake. I told him to let the professionals finish. But he laughed. Emily, you worry too much. My guy knows what he's doing. Besides, why waste more money? I let it go. After all, I was the one who was going to be living there. Something went wrong, I'd deal with it. But now it was my sister's problem. A week later the calls started. First my mom. I let it go to voicemail. Then my sister. I ignored her. Then my dad. By the time I checked my phone I had 6 missed calls. I finally listened to the voicemail from my mom. Her voice was strained, irritated. Not apologetic. Emily. I don't know if you did something or if you knew something, but the guest house has a major issue. The plumbing is leaking into the walls, the electrician must have messed something up because the power keeps going out, and there's a terrible smell coming from somewhere inside. Your sister can't even move in yet. We need to talk. I played it twice. Then I laughed. Not because I did anything. Not because I planned it. But because they did this to themselves. The moment I left, they realized how much they needed me. And I wasn't coming back. I ignored my mother's voicemail. Not out of pettiness. Not because I wanted revenge. But because for the first time in my life, it wasn't my problem. I didn't do anything to that house. I hadn't sabotaged it, hadn't left anything unfinished. The only thing I had done was walk away. And now, a week later, it was already falling apart. I sat with my phone in my lap, staring at the missed calls. I knew I should have felt something, satisfaction, anger, relief, but mostly I just felt empty. Because this wasn't just about the house. It wasn't about the money I had spent or the time I had wasted. It was about everything that led up to that moment. Because deep down I had always known. My family had never treated me the same way they treated my sister. But I had convinced myself that if I worked hard enough, if I was useful enough, if I was good enough, they would see me as just as important. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to people who would never choose me. And this was just the final proof. Because I had literally built a home for myself in their world, and the moment it was finished they had kicked me out like I was nothing. I turned off my phone and let myself remember. It started when we were kids. My sister Lisa was the baby. She could do no wrong. If we got into an argument, it was always my fault. If something broke in the house, Lisa could lie straight to my parents' faces, and they would still find a way to blame me. She's younger than you, Emily. You need to set an example. You're just being difficult. I learned young that Lisa didn't have to take responsibility for anything. Because I would always be expected to pick up the pieces. I can't even count the number of times she lost something important. Her phone, her wallet, even her passport once. And somehow I was the one sent to help fix it. But the worst part? She was never grateful. Not once. Not when I covered for her when she skipped class. Not when I gave her money when she blew through her allowance. Not when she crashed my car and lied to my parents that it was my fault. And my parents? They never cared about fairness. They cared about keeping Lisa happy. I still remember the day I realized just how deep that went. It was the summer before college. I had been saving every penny I made from my part-time job, planning to buy a used car so I wouldn't have to rely on rides. My parents had promised to match whatever I saved, so I worked all summer, barely spending anything. Then 2 weeks before I was supposed to buy the car, Lisa wrecked hers. Not a minor accident. A complete write-off. The next day I came home to find out my parents had given her all of my savings to buy a new car. Lisa needs it more, my mom had said when I confronted her. You're leaving for college soon. She still has to get to school. I was so stunned I just stood there. They didn't even ask me. Didn't even pretend to consider how unfair it was. And when I told them I was upset, they acted like I was selfish for even bringing it up. We're a family, Emily, my dad had said, shaking his head. You'll understand when you're older. I did understand. Just not the way he thought. That was the first time I pulled away. The first time I realized I wasn't safe with them. But I didn't cut them off. Not completely. Because I still wanted to believe that someday things would change. That they would see me as equal. That they would finally choose me. So when they suggested building the guest house, I thought, this is it. This is my chance to have something that's mine. And I fell for it. A sharp vibration from my phone pulled me back to the present. Another call. I sighed and finally picked up. It was my dad this time. His voice was tight. Frustrated. Emily, what's going on with the house? I blinked. What do you mean? You know what I mean. His voice dropped lower, like he thought someone might be listening. Lisa can't even move in yet. The plumbing is completely messed up. There's water damage in the walls, the electrical is faulty, and now the whole place smells like mold. I almost laughed. Sounds like you should call a contractor. There was a pause. Look, he said, his tone shifting like he was trying to stay calm. If something happened, you need to tell me now. Did you leave something unfinished? Did you mess something up? I clenched my jaw. I didn't do anything, Dad. You're the one who hired that cheap contractor against my advice. Maybe you should call him. Another pause. He wasn't expecting me to stand my ground. Emily, you know we don't have the money to fix this right now. But there was the real reason he was calling. They thought they could get me to come back and clean up their mess. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. But it's not my problem. Silence. Then anger. Emily, don't be like this. I didn't say anything. You can't just turn your back on family, he said, his voice sharp now. We raised you. We gave you everything. Everything? I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. No, Dad. I gave you everything. And I'm done. I hung up. For the next few days the calls kept coming. My mom, my dad, even Lisa. Some were angry, demanding. Others were manipulative, pretending to be worried about me. I ignored them all. But then something shifted. I started getting messages from other family members. At first, just a few cousins asking if I was okay. Then an aunt. Then an uncle. Then finally my grandmother. Emily, sweetheart. Your mom says you abandoned them and left the house unfinished. What's going on? I closed my eyes. They were trying to turn the family against me. They weren't just upset about the house. They were humiliated. Because now they had to tell people that the home they took from me was falling apart. And they needed someone to blame. I felt the anger rise in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. They wanted me to react. They wanted me to come back and fix things. But I wasn't going to. Because the truth was finally starting to spread. And for once, I wasn't the one losing. I didn't respond to my grandmother's message right away. I knew exactly what was happening. My parents were spinning the story before I could. They weren't just calling me anymore. They were calling everyone else, making sure their version of events got out first. I could already imagine how they framed it. Emily abandoned us after we let her live here for free. She stormed off over nothing and left the house unfinished. We always did everything for her, and this is how she repays us. It didn't matter that I had paid for everything, that I had spent months building that house with my own money and effort. In their version of events, I was ungrateful and selfish. And I had no doubt that some people would believe them. That was how it always went. They had been doing it my whole life, repainting reality until it fit the story they wanted to tell. I wasn't about to play their game. So I waited. I let the phone calls go unanswered. I ignored the text. I watched as the missed calls piled up. And then after a few days something changed. The messages from extended family stopped asking if I was okay, and started sounding different. More skeptical. More curious. Something was shifting. And I had a feeling I knew why. Because my parents weren't just losing control of me anymore. They were losing control of the house. The house they stole. It started with a message from my aunt. Emily, honey, I heard the guest house is unlivable? That the mold is spreading? What's going on? I stared at the text, heartbeat slowing. Mold? That wasn't something my parents had mentioned in their voicemail. They had complained about the plumbing, the electrical issues. But not mold. And if it was spreading, that meant it wasn't just a minor issue. It was bad. A second message popped up, this time from my cousin. Hey, random question. Do your parents really not have the money to fix the guest house? I heard Lisa's fiancé is pissed because they expected to move in by now. I swallowed hard. I had a feeling my parents were in trouble. They had assumed I would come back to fix everything. That I would feel guilty or desperate enough to be accepted again, that I'd just do what they wanted. But I didn't. No. Now they were stuck with a completely unlivable house that was falling apart faster than they could cover it up. And the best part? They had promised it to Lisa and her fiancé. Which meant that, for the first time, my sister was turning against them too. I knew it was only a matter of time before Lisa called. And when she did, she didn't even try to hide her frustration. Emily, what the hell is wrong with that house? She snapped the moment I picked up. I almost laughed. Why are you asking me? I said calmly. Because, she huffed, Dad said you handled everything. That you worked with the contractors, that you made sure everything was done right. I did. I cut in. Right up until Dad decided to cut corners and hire his own guy to finish things off. Maybe you should ask him. Silence. Then, more hesitantly, he said it's your fault the permits aren't going through. I raised an eyebrow. What permits? Lisa let out a frustrated breath. The ones for the plumbing and electricity. They said you didn't file the final paperwork and now the city won't approve occupancy. I blinked. Then I actually laughed. Because that was when I realized, my parents had played themselves. They had always assumed I would be living there. That I would be the one dealing with city inspections, handling the last few approvals. But the second they kicked me out, they had also kicked out the only person who knew how to finish the job legally. And now the city wasn't letting them move anyone in. That's not my problem, Lisa, I said, voice calm. She let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. You think you're so smug, don't you? No, I said honestly. I just think you and Dad should have thought things through before stealing my house. Oh my God, Emily, stop being so dramatic, she snapped. You weren't even paying rent. Lisa, I paid for the entire house. Silence. A long, painful silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the realization sinking in. She knew I was right. She knew that if the roles were reversed, if she had built something with her own money only to have it taken away, she would have lost her mind. But she couldn't admit that. So instead she did what she always did. She lashed out. Well, Mom and Dad are telling everyone that you abandoned them, she said coldly. That you left a mess behind. You should probably know that people are talking. I didn't react. She was trying to scare me. Trying to guilt me into coming back and cleaning up their mess. Then let them talk, I said simply. Lisa let out a breath, frustrated. God, you're so selfish. Goodbye, Lisa. And I hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling something strange. Peace. Because I knew what was coming next. The more my parents lied, the more people would start asking questions. And they wouldn't like the answers. They had spent years painting me as the responsible one. The one who handled things, helped out, kept the family running. Now they were suddenly trying to make me the villain. And people were going to notice the inconsistencies. I wasn't going to fight them. I wasn't going to explain myself. I didn't need to. Because the truth always comes out. And for once, I wasn't the one who had anything to lose. I didn't hear from Lisa after that call. Not for a few days at least. But I knew that didn't mean things had settled down. If anything, it meant things were getting worse. My parents and sister weren't the type to accept consequences quietly. If Lisa had gone silent, it was only because she was scrambling behind the scenes, trying to find a way to fix things without admitting they messed up. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of reaching out first. And then, just as I expected, the calls started again. First from a random uncle I barely spoke to. Then from an older cousin who lived out of state. Then finally from my grandmother. That's when I knew things had escalated. Because my grandmother was the last person my parents would have wanted involved. She wasn't the type to blindly take their side. She was sharp, no nonsense, and didn't fall for guilt trips. If she was calling me, it meant she had heard the whole story, or at least their version of it. I picked up. Emily, sweetheart, she said, her voice warm but firm. I just had a very interesting conversation with your mother. I smiled to myself. Let me guess, I said. She told you I abandoned them and left a disaster behind? Something like that, my grandmother said. I could hear the skepticism in her tone. But I've known you a long time and that didn't sound quite right to me. I exhaled slowly. What did she say? That you stormed off over a silly misunderstanding, left the guest house unfinished, and now your poor sister and her fiancé have nowhere to live. And of course she and your father are heartbroken that you've turned your back on the family. I let out a short laugh. Did she mention that I paid for the entire house? There was a pause. Then dryly, no, I don't believe she did. Of course she didn't. So what really happened? My grandmother asked. And for the first time I told someone the full truth. I told her how my parents had encouraged me to build the guest house, promising it would be mine. How I had used my own savings and spent months managing the construction, picking out materials, making sure everything was perfect. And then, the moment it was finished, they gave it away to Lisa. My grandmother didn't interrupt me once. She just listened. And when I was done, she let out a slow, measured breath. That's low, she finally said. Yeah, I muttered. And let me guess, she continued. They expected you to come crawling back the moment things started falling apart? Bingo. There was a pause. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. You should come to Sunday dinner. I blinked. What? Everyone's going to be there, she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I think it's time you let them all know your side of the story. I hesitated. It wasn't that I was afraid of my parents. I had no interest in begging for their approval anymore. But calling them out in front of the whole family? That was a different level. Grandma, I don't know if I want to. I'm not saying to cause a scene, she cut in. I'm just saying, let them dig their own hole. I considered that. Then slowly I smiled. All right, I said. I'll be there. Sunday dinner. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift in the room. People had heard things. Some glanced at me curious. Others looked uncomfortable. And then there were the ones, like my aunt and a few cousins, who gave me small knowing nods. Like they already knew exactly what was going on. Lisa was sitting next to my parents, her arms crossed tightly. She didn't meet my eyes. My mom forced a smile. Oh, Emily, you actually made it. Yeah, I said simply, taking a seat. I didn't add surprised. But the implication was there. Dinner started awkwardly. There was forced small talk, tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. And then, just as we were finishing up, my grandmother, bless her heart, set down her glass and said, "So Lisa, how's the new house coming along?" Silence. Lisa's jaw tensed. "We're still dealing with a few issues," my dad said quickly. "Oh?" my grandmother said, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of issues?" Lisa shot him a look, but my dad cleared his throat. "Nothing major. Just some, plumbing and electrical problems. Minor setbacks." I almost laughed. Minor setbacks. That's what they were calling it. My grandmother turned to me. "Emily, dear, didn't you handle all the construction on that house?" Every eye in the room turned to me. I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. "I did. Right up until Dad decided to hire a cheaper contractor behind my back to save money. I told him it was a mistake, but..." I shrugged. "What do I know, right?" The silence that followed was incredible. Lisa's face turned red. My mom's forced smile twitched. My dad looked like he wanted to strangle me. But they couldn't argue. Because they knew I was right. No. So did everyone else. The whisper started. My aunt leaned over to my cousin, whispering something I couldn't hear. My uncle shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." And that was it. That was the moment my parents lost control of the story. Because now everyone knew. No matter how many excuses they made, how much they tried to twist things, the damage was already done. I left dinner feeling lighter than I had in months. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't gotten into an argument. I had simply let the truth speak for itself. And that was enough. My parents didn't call me after that. Neither did Lisa. The damage was done. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had lost.